Well, let's share a word of prayer. Gracious and holy God, we are blessed to be able to be together and to seek out your wisdom and your will for our lives. We are grateful that we can come to this place, that we are healthy enough to come out. And we pray for those who are unable to get out and about as much as they would like, or even as much as they need to do. We pray for those who are sick and injured and struggling, and we simply ask that you provide them with blessings that go beyond whatever we as human beings can possibly do. For we know, O God, that it is through your acts of grace that oftentimes what we think is not possible becomes possible, and that through you we can do more things than we ever thought. We ask now that you be with us as we continue in our study. Grant that this Lenten season might be a time of introspection for us, and also a time of renewal and recommitment. For we ask this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I kind of wanted to start at the middle, just with some anecdote. We're on the third week, we're page 43. In the writing, it cites Marcus Borg and John Dominic Crossan, and the two parades, which we've actually used in sermons and studies before. I had the privilege when I was up at Kirkridge to work with both Marcus and John and have some private time with them. And these are two of the greatest Jesus scholars ever to walk the face of the earth. But they worked up a lot of stuff, not just what was cited, but in their lectures and other areas, the contrast of the two entrances, the two parades. We are certainly aware of the Palm Sunday parade and the crowds saying, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And then there was the opposite parade that was, quite frankly, much more significant in terms of size and grandeur. And that was the Roman government military parade, which was sent to Jerusalem during the Passover as a reminder to the Jews that they could be snuffed out anytime the Roman government decided to do it. And the reason behind this was during Passover and other feasts as well, Jerusalem would quadruple in size. Jerusalem back in the day of Jesus would have been roughly the size of Easton. So 30 to 40,000 people probably. That would swell for these festivals where people would come back to 150,000 or more. Crowds can be fired up pretty easily, and it wouldn't take all that many zealots to try to roust up the crowds, and this is the time we take over the Romans and we get rid of them forever and reclaim Jerusalem as our own. And the Roman government just wanted to make sure this wasn't going to happen. and the parade was a deterrent to some radicals just trying to get people instigated into doing something. Jerusalem was so we don't as Christians fully understand the importance of Jerusalem as those early Jews did, and Jews today, who make pilgrimages to the holy city as almost a mandate. And when you were in Jesus's time, the Jews were expected to go to Jerusalem for the Passover unless there were some extenuating circumstance that really prohibited them from going. And really the main circumstance would be that they were mobility impaired. There may have been those who were poor and decided not to spend their limited funds on a trip to Jerusalem, but they were even to some extent frowned upon because everybody was just expected to go. We don't have those expectations in Christianity. I think we respect the city of Jerusalem, but we don't necessarily pick up and go there like the Jews would have done. If you look at page 45, this is where Marcus and John are quoted, that they mention that the church has often overlooked the secular when it comes to this Palm Sunday story. That we benefit from sitting back and just pondering what it would be like if we were the faithful few who wanted to come and celebrate an important religious holiday, and all of a sudden we were invaded by a military that could crush us at a moment's notice. Think, if you will, we're downtown on Good Friday doing the crosswalk with 25 or 30 people, and the next thing you know, the infantry comes marching into town to make sure that we don't get too excited about things and cause a problem. That spectacle is overlooked mainly because we're focusing on the celebration of Palm Sunday. We're not highlighting the other parade. But it's one of those things where we need to keep our minds open that this is occurring, that this is part of the deal. I lived in Philadelphia, in the Philadelphia area, when Frank Rizzo was the mayor. And Frank Rizzo was a former police chief or whatever he was. But he was one that had no qualms with using force to quiet down rabble-rousers, even if they were being peaceful in their protests. Or think about the early human rights campaigns in the South where protesters would be greeted by fire hoses and biting dogs and those sorts of things, that even those who wanted to have a peaceful event were overshadowed by this opposition that they had to deal with. And I think that a lot of us in some of our religious endeavors just want to be able to practice our faith, and we're not going to create a threat to anybody by it. But just by practicing our faith alone, somebody sees us as a threat. So keep that in mind as we consider this second parade. Were there zealots there who would want to create a problem? Probably, but they were minimal. Probably not enough to do anything. Most of us, we would, if we were the Jews going to the Passover, we would look at them and these zealots and say, well, they're lunatics. They're the street corner preacher. Yeah, but almost as if we're going to approach them as being eccentric oddities and not taking them seriously. So it could very well be that this second parade was not only to keep the peace in Jerusalem, but just to remind the Jews who would then disperse back to their hometowns that the government was the one who was ruling and not the Jews.
You're saying that the Romans were the second parade?
Yes.
So you picture them entering Jerusalem separate from the Jews? Or
yes.
Was it?
Yes. Two separate events.
The Jews went first, and
well, I don't know.
That.
They might have been simultaneous,
Mm-hmm.
but they came from different directions. And I've used the image of there being two gates into the city, and the Jesus people took the less prominent of the gates, while the Roman government chose the grand entrance. It's do I come into East Bangor on 512 or do I sneak in through High Street? Which direction do I come from? And obviously Jesus was strategic in knowing that if he would have chosen the same gate as the Roman government, he never would have gotten to the point of the rest of his mission, because they wouldn't have, they could have cared less. They'd squash him like a bug. But the Passover was a great time for the Roman government to advertise to the people of the surrounding areas, not only Jerusalem, how powerful they could be. Because oftentimes it's news didn't travel fast. They didn't have anything close to a social media thing where you could gather a flash mob together to do something. Everything was a lot slower, And as these folks left the Passover and went home, they would probably say, wow, Jesus came in, and man, you should have seen that parade the Roman government put on.
But then wasn't that Jesus' intent all along, to make it peaceful and simple?
You have opposites, you know, and what do opposites do? A lot of times opposites call us to make a choice. Do you want a good church? Conflict is, what color carpet do we want? And you got to make a choice. You know, you can't have red, green, beige, or, well, just mix them all together and see how it turns out. You don't, you know, you make choices. And Jesus sets this up as a choice. And, you know, the Roman government parade, that was yearly. The people would have expected that every year at Passover. The Jesus parade, that was a one-time thing. And we don't know how big it was. You know, we sometimes think of crowds waving their palm branches and throwing their cloaks on the road. And other times we think it was a handful of people who got Jesus's message and were willing to stand along the road and say, go get them. Much like so many protests that we see can be a handful of people standing on a bridge waving a banner versus those things you get on the National Mall in Washington where you have 100,000 people or more. I remember two events I was at in Washington where I was amazed at the number of human beings in one spot. And then, you know, you go something like a crosswalk, which in its way is a protest, you can be relatively small.
Why is it a protest?
Because it's a protest against oppression. Remember, Jesus came for the oppressed and the marginalized and the sinner, and not the powerful and not the ones who think they know everything. And so it becomes a bit of a protest of, we're going to live this way. To me, one of the greatest influential protests that we as Christians do is live as Christians. You know, we don't see it maybe that way because that's who we are. But to the rest of the world, you know, people see things different.
Are they jealous? Are they jealous of it?
You know,
Or why do they?
I think, and if you look back, I think the Romans, their culture was based on power. Jesus was based on peacefulness. And what brings us that sense of peace? Well, that we trust in God, that we believe Jesus died for our sins, and that maybe it comes down to sometimes that we're satisfied with who we are as Christians, that we're able to just say, this is enough for me. I don't need anything else. You know, the average Roman aspired or wished that they had 1/1000th of everything the emperor had. The emperor was we used to say that every boy in America wanted to grow up to be president. Well, every boy in the Roman Empire probably wanted to grow up to be emperor. In these two parades, you have power versus nonviolent protest to the power. And what wins? Even if you go back to the human rights issue, the march over what's now Edmund Pettus Bridge was a peaceful walk. It was met with violence because those who seek out power don't know any other way. Those who follow the way of Jesus know the alternative way, even if it doesn't seem as attractive as guns and missiles and being able to wipe people out. Well, after that sermon, we'll pass the collection plate. Page 47 is the confrontation, and this is where I think there are legitimate questions as to, did Jesus ever respond to things with a violent act?
Yes, it did. In the temple.
Yep, and this tearing over the tables was responding power to power. And as human beings, even those who have the greatest amount of patience with others can reach that point where it's, I've crossed the line. Yeah, I've crossed the line. I think we make every attempt to not get there, but when you are getting to the point where you can't take it anymore, there may be that breaking point. I have had that breaking point occur when somebody for the 600th time calls to sell me an extended car warranty, or whatever else it might be that irritates us. I started off my adult life selling sheet music, and there were musicians who they just were a little too difficult. And I learned something from the president of the first company I worked for, when he got on the phone with a irate person and said, "Why don't you just take your business elsewhere?" And I was, and the thing was, he did it nicely, but I was like, "Wait, we don't do that, do we?" But there are points where we need to stand up and be counted. The unfortunate thing with the turning over of the tables in the temple was, by temple policy, those vendors were not doing anything wrong. This was a year after year thing. It was like buying a table at a flea market. And there was necessity to it. If you were coming 25 miles from your town to Jerusalem to make a sacrificial offering, would you really want to drag an animal 25 miles behind you the whole time? You know, or you needed money to pay the temple tax. Well, you didn't pay the temple tax with Roman money because that would be sacrilege. So you needed to have the money changer who would take care of that for you, and then you would be squared away. There was a certain convenience to it. And that convenience meant that, yeah, you were probably overpriced, much as if I go to Weiss to buy a gallon of milk, I pay $4.39. But if I'm in a hurry and I stop at Turkey Hill, I'm paying $5.90. And there is a surcharge that I'm willing to pay for convenience at times. Mm-hmm. So these vendors in the temple courtyard made out quite well. But the temple was getting its share of the profits. And it was a win-win for the temple and the vendors and the people.
Was the temple always the center of, I want to say, selling, buying and selling?
Just for the festivals. Because the other times of the year, the temple wasn't all that busy. I mean, they would have the religious services, but they didn't necessarily have the sacrifices and the visitors from out of town and all of the hullabaloo that they had at the Passover when everything swelled overnight, and there was this mad rush to make your sacrifice, to pay your temple tax, and it was just a way to set up a convenient way of doing business.
Was the tipping point for Jesus in the temple and what he did, his remembering when he was a young man, studying scriptures with the priest at that time, and then to see what the temple had become? Was that his tipping point?
Well, and the line of the temple's a house of prayer and you've made it into a den of robbers. The respect that Jesus had for the temple was prominent. Jesus was a good Jew. We don't want to forget that. He didn't. His intent wasn't to rebel against Judaism. It was to offer a revival to Judaism. That's where his difference. Jesus didn't try to convert people to Christianity. Christianity isn't a title that we have yet. Until we really get to post-resurrection times. He was spurring an alternative revival movement in Judaism, away from the complete legalism. When did Jesus get in trouble in his life? Well, healing on the Sabbath, eating on the Sabbath, picking the grains on the Sabbath. When he went against the legalism of the Jewish religion and tried to act out the spirit of the faith, that's when he irritated people.
The timing was all wrong. He was entering Jerusalem to make a point, and he didn't want to see that. His point was 180 degrees from what he saw.
Yeah, because he was the alternative lifestyle that was being modeled. And he had a sense of purity of relationship with God. And that purity of relationship didn't have a whole lot of respect for the legalism or the bureaucracy of what was happening in Judaism, especially with the Pharisees and to some extent the Sadducees. And we think about it, for example, to pick up on something that Tom mentioned on Sunday, the amount of information we provide so that we can find out what our apportionments are. And for those who were involved with me, getting the statistical report together, which is a bureaucratic nightmare.
To say the least.
And that there are these peaceful protests that occur even in our own denomination of, we're not here for the legalism, we're here for the call of Christ on our lives, and we're going to follow that through as being a priority. And if we get to the other stuff, then we get to the other stuff. But there's a phenomenal amount of bureaucratic organization and expectation that comes in religion. The Jews were prominent at this. I mean, you look at the Jewish laws, there are 734 of them? And, good golly, we have a hard time remembering the Ten Commandments, let alone the other 724 of what animal can be eaten and how many toes it has on its hoof. And, but it was, Jesus was making an attempt both to the Roman government to say, here, I have an alternative way, and to the Jewish hierarchy to say, here's an alternative way. That this is not about the Jewish leaders placating the Roman government and the Roman government letting the Jewish leaders have their festivals. This is something greater. And Jesus was that representative. So you can almost look at it as a triangle, where you have Roman government, Jewish leadership, Jesus. And how those three conflict with each other. Now, I think the least conflict of interest was between the Roman government and Jesus. Remember, for the crucifixion, in order for the Roman government to kind of let things go, Judaism was the one that negotiated with the Roman government. The Romans did not go directly and say, oh, Jesus is a troublemaker, we need to take care of him. They had to be egged on. And when you look at Pilate, doing the traditional release of one prisoner, he really tried to have Jesus released. And the crowds were then told, we're asking for Jesus Barabbas. So, you have all these dynamics that are going on between this triumvirate of forces. And let's face it, it's what we have more or less today. I mean, we always have competing parades that aren't parades, but they are realities. And in these confrontational moments, my decision is I probably can't change power structures. Okay? I don't think I could go to a power structure and say, hey, my name's Dave, I hope you change, thanks, I appreciate it. No, I don't have that power, right? What I do have the power is to choose how I'm going to live. And if I'm willing to make that choice, then I at least don't fall prey to the structure. There's the Jewish, the rabbinical tale of the prophet who goes into a town and prophesies day after day after day, and nothing ever changes, nothing ever changes. And finally somebody asks him, why do you waste your time? You go in day after day after day and nothing changes, nothing changes. And he says, well, by speaking against it, at least I don't become part of it. And, that's, in our faith, is critical. It's so easy to be tempted to say, oh, I'm in the Jesus parade, but wow, the Romans are coming and I'm going to go over there. They're probably throwing out candy. But it's just critical to appreciate that on this particular Passover, there's so much more going on than the average Passover. You have peaceful entrance, you have violent act in the temple, which is the ultimate nail in Jesus's cross, so to speak. Had that not occurred, who knows? Now, in John, by the way, it occurs much earlier in the story than it does in the Synoptic Gospels, where it's part of that final Passover visit. What are we drawn to? If we have to make the choice between Jesus and power, power can be so seductive to us. It's easier to be part of the power because all you got to do is be complicit. Following Jesus in so many instances actually is saying, I'm not going to be complicit with society at large. And I'm going to do what I can to live my life in a different way. On page 49, he goes into this thing about community. I was a little bit struggling with what he was necessarily trying to get at here, other than he saw that the temple had its segregation, and in its segregation, there were various spots where different types of people could meet and never the twain shall meet. There's a hotel in Philadelphia. It's not a hotel anymore, but I think it's apartments, and it was abandoned for several years, called the Divine Lorraine.
The divine what?
Lorraine, Lorraine. And apparently, the story goes that men had to sleep on one side of the building and women on the other, even if they were married. It was some sort of thing.
But always.
But I think there are certainly, we understand, like, you know, in 1956, which is what, 60 years ago, 70 years ago, is the first female ordained in the Methodist Church. And Jane Harner, who was ordained, the bishop still wouldn't give her an appointment. And that was probably the biggest hullabaloo in the Methodist movement since slavery split the denomination. That, you know, and I remember my mother had objections to women ministers and women umpires in baseball. But I'm not sure. I think there was one at that point in the minors. But there's been separatism, right? And a lot of the separatism that we do is voluntary. Who do I hang out with? Well, I hang out with people like me. I have to be intentional to hang out with people not like me. When I served in Allentown, we had another congregation that used our building that was African American, and the pastor was African American, and we struggled to connect with each other. I remember we read this book together called Black and White Styles in Conflict, and we had to be very intentional to hang out, you know, to go out to lunch, to visit each other's services, because we hang out with people who are like us.
Yeah, but you were both pastors.
Well, but you know, that's kind of like, where's, the problem with is, you know, give me enough time with somebody and I'm going to find the difference. You know, it's easy to sink to the level of our differences quicker than we might anticipate and not look at the commonalities. And Judaism, of course, back in the day, and back in this temple period, you know, they just had their way of doing things, and they didn't see it as odd. There might have been occasional squawks against it, but nothing significant. And we can come up with that in our own dealings. It's just the way it is. And again, our choice is not so much how do we convince the powers to change, but how do we change ourselves to live closer to the way that Jesus would want us to live. And the Jesus way, according to Wilkie, was that in the earliest church, there was more of an inclusivity than there was in the Jewish temple. Now, I don't think that it was as inclusive as some say that it was. I think in the early church, the women who were involved had something to give. Several of Jesus's financial donors were women who had their husband's money and passed it along.
Well, isn't that true, especially in the Methodist Church and their emphasis on the laity?
Mm-hmm.
They believe that the laity plays a super important part in the success of any church.
Yeah, and it's where that we have the concept between clergy and laity of separate but equal. Where if you look, for example, still at the Roman Catholic Church, it's much more hierarchical, and the bishop or the priest determines that the rectory needs a new roof, and all of a sudden you're into a capital campaign. Where if I came along and said, hey, I need a new car, we're taking a separate collection, I would probably have anarchy. As should be. We also, as Jesus people, look out for avoiding power struggles in our own midst. And naturally, we may first want to placate those who can provide much. I got in trouble when I was up at Kirkridge, more than once, but I was in charge of the newsletter, and we would put our donors in. And I decided that one issue, I was putting the donors in, listing them from smallest to largest. Yeah, and I kind of caught hell for that. And you know what? As a fundraiser, I understand that, because you sidle up to those who can give much. Wilkie uses the illustration of the temple offering, where people come through and give their offering with a lot of show, versus the poor widow woman who gives the 2 coins as all she has. And what he's trying to do is even it out, so that it's not the wealthy or it's not the poor. That doesn't separate us. We're all one people, and we do what we can, and that's enough. Those that have much is expected.
But don't give it showingly, right?
Yeah. I was in one, I don't know how common this is, but worshiping at Salem United Methodist Church in Harlem many years ago. If you tithed, you presented your tithe. You took it up to the altar, and then they passed the plate.
I don't follow
They
you.
announced it?
If you gave your 10%, you actually brought it up to the altar before the offering. The rest of the people who gave were basically saying, I'm not a tither.
So do they count it and hold you accountable?
I don't know. I had the problem of I had like a $20 bill and I needed to get across the bridge. They had gotten all they were getting out of me.
Who determined in that church that this would happen?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I was a one-time visitor. There was a lot of stuff that I was like out in left field on. Even in that, just as an aside, during the sermon, the woman beside me talked to the preacher, and that was disruptive to me, but not to them. You know, they would make comments during the sermon and, you know, preach it, you know, amen. And it's kind of like, whoa, I gotta watch it. No, thank you. I'm not used to it.
Yeah.
You know, what's one of the things that keeps us apart? Well, you know, if you look at different worship styles, no, thank you, Jane. If I decided to show up next week with a rock band and a laser show,
You
that
want to
would,
pack your bags now?
yeah, you'd see.
Call it district good.
No, but I mean, we're used to certain things, right? And one of the things that we're used to, just because it's been jammed down our throats, is that things like wealth, power, prestige are desirable, where peace, reaching out to the oppressed, embracing the marginalized, is not. We're going to talk on Sunday. I'm going to go back, I think, and use the illustration that I've used before of when I was in high school down in Bucks County. We would often take the train into Philadelphia to go to the Vet or to Convention Hall, where there was a minor hockey team and whatever. And our parents let us go with a great amount of angst, because we were white, rural hicks, and we were going to the big city, and it was like, don't make eye contact with anybody. Straight ahead is the way you go. And that prevents us from engaging with others. And I don't know what to do. I mean, I seriously don't. Occasionally there's a guy that hangs out over in the giant parking lot, right at when you're coming out. And it's, he's a homeless veteran. You know, and gosh, I don't know whether it's legit.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know what to do. We get calls in the church of, you know, Christmas Eve, I don't have any presents for my kids. You know, I don't know what to do, because there's so much of you know, scams and everything else. And you don't want to live like a greedy stick in the mud, but you don't want to be gullible either.
Yeah.
You know, and as Christians, I think that's one of the things where we wrestle, is how much do I engage with those who are not like me? Where is my comfort zone? How much do I placate those in power, because those in power determine a lot of the things that I get?
What's scam and what isn't?
Yeah, I think we're constantly dealing with that, and it kind of goes back to the idea of, well, what would be our proper response to this Roman government parade that came into town? Would it be Throwing eggs at them? No, that would probably be a bad idea. But, would it be watching with respect? Would it be sneering? Would we go at all? I don't know.
Going back
Would you
to
want to, go ahead.
Going back to something you said before, there's a song, it's a country song, and this person is singing about all of the problems that people have if you're homeless and you're on the street. And from the person who's on the street, it says, don't think that I don't notice that you don't have eye contact. And so it's difficult. It's difficult, as you say. I think I've told this story before. Missy and I were in Florida, and we were driving out, and there was this man on the side of the road who had a sign, and he had no money. So, and I if I remember correctly, we gave him something. But what do? I mean, you do the best you can, and you make the best decision you can. But it's got to be really hard for these people too. So it's a tough. I try to be kind and understanding, but as you said before, there's so many scams out there, and you don't know. And her and I both said, God, I hope he's not going to go and buy drugs. I mean, but we gave him some money.
It was on him though.
Yeah, but it was on him, and we did give him some money.
So you were generous from heart.
Yeah.
And then that was from him going forward.
Yeah.
And it's
how
a
I
good
look at
point,
it.
because so much of it has to be based on our intent,
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
not what happens from then on in.
Right.
If my intent is good, then I can lay my head on my pillow at night and say, I done good.
Yeah.
Because I can't control somebody else. Nor do I want to walk in the shoes of somebody who has to resort to a scam in order to survive. I don't like that either. And part of me wants to simply ask the question, why does somebody resort to this? What's going on?
Because the majority of people will feel something.
Yeah.
They will feel
Want to be
something
kind.
and give in.
They want to be kind.
Yeah, you have doubts, but like you said, you can lay your head on it because you've done something.
And you also don't know, and this goes back years, that one lady that was horrible to me when I was working at Panera Bread. You have no idea. You have no idea what that person's going through, what kind of day they've had, who they are, what kind of agony, good or bad. And after this lady was very unkind to me, I was very nice to her, and she came back and she said, I am so sorry, I was so rude. I said, it's okay. I said, have a better day, please. Just have a better day. So I try to think about that because you don't know what someone's going through.
No, you don't.
And some people are good with stress and other people are not. So it's like driving on the highway. When somebody does something dumb, I think, how many dumb things have you done?
Yeah.
So I try to let it go and try to be a better person.
Good for you.
When it comes to something like that though, driving, I try to model myself after somebody who's patient, like Tom Martin.
Oh yeah, right.
Do that.
Oh no, we didn't want to go there.
Blow your horn in back of me sometime.
No, you don't want to see it.
When it comes to my life and faith in general, the only thing I can live with is my intent. I can't tell you to do anything, nor do I want to. Your faith journey has to be your faith journey. Mine needs to be mine. There are times that they run parallel to each other, and other times that they may conflict. The best I can offer to you is that I respect that your faith journey is as important to you as mine is to me. This is the crisis that occurred between Jesus and the Pharisees. The Pharisees did not have the ability or the desire to respect that someone thought a little differently than they did. Likewise, with the turning over of the tables in the temple, Jesus showed that he didn't have patience all the time for people who thought differently than he did. And, you know, that's...
You see the human side of
that-
it.
well, yeah.
We shouldn't use that as an excuse, but in the same token, it's kind of makes a person feel better to know that he was human too.
Yeah, I think that really does, because even in my journey to Christian perfection, there are lapses. And it's helpful for me to know, because Jesus the divine is less likely to understand Dave the human than Jesus the human. And that's when we get into Christology and this mathematical difficulty of Jesus is fully human and fully divine. It may be a hard thing to process, but it's an important thing to process. To recognize that Jesus understands us because he was one of us. And yet he wasn't one of us, if that makes any sense.
Wasn't that the plan all along?
Yeah, pretty much. You know, that when God saw that we needed to have an invasion of hope, that Jesus was the answer to give us a sense of hope. Because if you look at the timing of Jesus walking the earth, it was right in the middle of this Roman occupation. It was when people needed hope, but they needed a different kind of hope. Because the Messiah that the Jews were looking for was going to be militaristic. The Savior who arrived was anything but. Maybe as 21st century Christians, we don't consider the impact of that as much, because we've now had 2,000 years to process Jesus. Jesus is more, you know, to modern day Christians, Jesus can be anything from a radical to a conformist to a cosmic Santa Claus to whatever we might tend to make him into. The totality of Jesus is harder to embrace. Jesus the radical and Jesus the conformist are both there. And the struggle I think we have is, when does one conform and when does one color outside the lines? And it's different for everybody. I mean, it's, you know, and it's like the idea of I gather with people who are like me. It's not only that I gather with white middle class people, but I gather with people who have the same causes I have. And if I have a cause, I manage to draw into that cause that Jesus is supporting it. You know, I don't necessarily have a cause because I clearly see it in Jesus' teaching. I should, but I don't always. And there are times that I have a cause that maybe Jesus never had said anything about or had anything to do with. And I have to make the connection between my faith and the cause. It may be a very tenuous connection. I just don't, Jesus did not speak about nuclear arms. Therefore, I have to try to make a connection if I'm going to make a connection in that area. We're dealing with information that is 2,000 years old in a world that is changing so rapidly we can hardly keep up with it. So Jesus doesn't say, I will not scam the pastor's email. That's just, he doesn't.
But there was false prophets, and
Yeah.
that's kind of comparable.
Well, that's a good point. I think if you take the false prophets, that's an area where we have to be really on our toes.
Mm-hmm. I think we learned that.
There's so many messages. Well, the messages that are out there come at us from so many different directions. And we are pummeled with them. And we have to sort them all out. And it's a lot different if I go back to Sunday's sermon, it's a lot different than gathering around the well or on the store benches and sharing the news of the day. Right? We're inundated now with news, opinions, causes, you name it. And we have to sort all that out.
But shouldn't the first question in our minds be, what would Jesus do?
Absolutely. Is that where we always go? No.
No.
But that's what we should
do.
be going, that our faith should guide our response. The challenges that we have, and I think now, one of the big challenges is artificial intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
And where all that's going to go. Is connecting, is to keeping Jesus prominent the further we get away from his earthly life. It's why in a lot of cases, taking a look at the early Christian fathers is important, because those people of the first, second, third centuries were a lot closer connected to the action than we are. And so if there are things that are spoken by the early Christian fathers, they're worth paying attention to, because they're only a century or two removed compared to 20 centuries removed.
I keep thinking we always talk about Howard Collins,
Mm-hmm.
and Howard believed in the red letters in the Bible. And I don't think Jesus, if he was here today, would have written anything any different as far as what he had to say compared to what he wrote in the Bible way back in those times.
Mm-hmm. The message of Jesus, can be overcomplicated or it can be oversimplified. We need to find the balance. We can overcomplicate Jesus to the point that we twist what he says in order to serve our purpose. You know, maybe a more simple message of Jesus is love God, love neighbor, don't be a jerk. You kind of carry that and okay, you know, maybe I can make some decisions from here. I don't know, I'm at the store and you know, there are two people in the aisle having a conversation and I need to get down to the aisle. You know, I can say, excuse me, or I can say, get out of my way.
Well, you can hit them with your shopping
I kind of look at that as Dave's version of turning over the tables in the temple. You know, my choice is there. It's all about the choices that I make. The parades, as much as they were historical events, are symbolic of, I got to make a choice. I can't be at both. Which one am I going to be at? And that's it.
See, I'm very simplistic, and I've said this I don't know how many times. 10 Commandments. I'm very simplistic. Do the best you can, follow the 10 Commandments. If everybody in the whole world followed the 10 Commandments, you know.
Forget about the other 784.
Yeah, really. So I really am.
724. Don't add to it.
Yeah, I am. I'm very simplistic.
I think the simpler we keep our faith, the better it is. The more we focus on our faith, the easier it is to understand what our faith responses are. Like I said, I may not agree with someone, and my protest oftentimes is merely not to participate in it. You know, that's my choice is to lay out, because I'm not going to change the situation by myself. I have one of the guys I went to seminary with is now pretty much a national name, William Barber. And there are those guys like him who maybe were designed by God to fight every battle. I'm not one of them. I don't need to fight every battle.
What is he doing now?
He's a pastor, but he's very outspoken. And plays, preaches as much out of the New York Times as he does the Bible. It is much more aware of what's going on in the news media than I am.
I think if you're, I don't know, this may be totally off, but I think if you're a true follower of Jesus, you're going to try to be as peaceful as possible. You're not going to be argumentative and look for the confrontation all the time. That's how I am. I don't know.
And you have to be willing to accept that it often puts you in the one down position of risking being abused to a point. You look at people like the martyrs, Gandhi, the Dalai Lama. I mean, people who embraced. There was did you follow the Buddhist Peace March at all? from Texas to Washington.
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
yes.
I actually bought a sweatshirt from them, which was produced in a foreign country where sizes apparently are different.
How far did they go? They went,
And it was 1,000 miles.
that's what I was gonna say, it was a very, very long distance.
Yeah.
I don't think he wore that shirt.
You know, I think that things like that, I mean, that was a powerful message that they brought.
But people that follow all of those that you talked about have nothing else in their life.
Mhm.
They have nothing else. So if this person is they're going to promise you everything. If they're going to give me everything that I need, I'm going to follow them blindly. And that's what they do.
Yeah, and you know, I expect it. One of the again, I'll go back a few years, but when I lived up in Bushkill, and there was an influx of people from the city. The people from the city came out and wondered why we didn't have the same services they had in the city. You know, if you had a heart attack, you got volunteer ambulance driver Dave, okay, whose medical knowledge was extremely limited. There wasn't paid fire department. You know, there wasn't. We didn't have a police force in Bushkill. You know, there's things that people, we start to become entitled, you know, of I should have this, and okay, you're going to give it to me, then I will be obedient to you, because I get what I feel I need. It's certainly harder to take an opposite position when we're benefiting from the powers that be.
Bushkill only had one stoplight. I mean,
Yeah.
what can you expect?
Kind of like Sullivan County, where they have one spotlight or traffic light for the whole county. But we you know, I suppose that one of our drives that we're born with is to be comfortable, to not have to worry and fret over what we may or may not have, to not feel threatened. You know, we have all those things, and so we look for resources that are going to meet our needs, or what we perceive as our needs. They may just be our wants, but we perceive as our needs, and you know, we're going to be happy with that. Hey, I'll tell you, I don't mind paying taxes.
You what?
I don't mind paying my taxes because I get a lot back from it. Are there things that I object my taxes going to? Yes, but in the overall scheme of things, I'm making out pretty good. If I'm making out pretty good, I have a certain amount of allegiance to whatever system's providing that. The Jews, the Pharisees, who were allowed to peacefully hold their Passover with the Romans breathing down their neck, had to be happy that the Romans didn't say you can't do this anymore. So there was a certain amount of maybe not allegiance, but tolerance of that power structure. Maybe the most prominent protesters are the ones who simply choose to live outside of the system. I think of the monks who live in isolation, who just choose to live outside of the system. as being primarily countercultural. And Wilkie talks about the confrontation today, and I'll just, this one sentence, even church leaders sometimes exercise political power to highlight their positions or strengthen their authority. So, you know, I can see where that happens, where William Barber is playing in politics. And you know what, if that's their thing, it's fine. What I object to is statements from people like him saying, well, you're wrong because you're not playing in that game. You know, you kind of got to take it with a grain of salt. And come to the end of the day and say, as a Christian, I am who I am. So that's it. Any closing comments?
I just have thought of one.
Yeah.
With that elderly man, you said sometimes a giant is a homeless veteran. Put him in touch with Tunnels to Towers, because their motto is no vet will go homeless. We'll find a home for them. So if he's put in touch with that organization.
Yeah, that's important because we've really screwed our veterans.
No, that's for sure.
And
I agree with you 100%, but anymore with all these scams, I'm wondering about St. Jude's, Tunnels for Towers. What?
Tunnels to Towers is a legitimate.
Well,
Yeah.
supposedly it is, yeah,
But you know what,
Yeah,
too?
I know what you mean.
With all those organizations, their corporate is so big, and they take your money and they have to pay for all the people that are working for them before it even gets to who it's desired to be.
yeah, for example, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, the CEO last year made $750,000.
Yeah.
And that's from the donations
Yeah.
and good-heartedness of people.
Yeah. Now, it doesn't say that they don't do good work,
Exactly.
but I think whenever you have a nonprofit entity, if you have upper management who are making exorbitant salaries, and even I used to be part of the American Society of Fundraising Professionals, and they had a rating scale of how much of your donations went to overhead versus how much went to the field. This week, we have Core Sunday. And Core Sunday, we have an offering which goes to support the administration of Core, so that when there's a need during the year and we take a special offering, everything goes into the field. It's a transparent way of saying, yes, we have organizational expenses that we need to take care of. But at the same point, we're not hiding that. And, you know, Core has to live within its means. And so we don't have people who are making a gazillion dollars.
And this is the same with Samaritan Purse.
Transparency.
Yeah.
They will break down everything
Everything.
for you to see, so that there's no overhead going to people.
Right.
It's all going to the thing.
When you look at it, and there are resources that you can tap into that rate charities as far as things are. So,
Well, like Ronald McDonald House, when my niece had her triplets, Lukey needed, I think it was a week or 4 weeks old, heart surgery. And I would like to look into it too, but Ronald McDonald House, they put her up and the triplets, they paid for the surgery, they never had to pay for anything.
Like
It's-
St. Jude's. like
At
that.
St. Jude is like that also. So, and I'm sure they do spend a lot of money, but they don't, Make-A-Wish.
Yeah.
My grandson was the beneficiary of Make-A-Wish, although he survived. And you don't pay anything.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's hard, when I used to work for a company, we did this thing where we wanted to find out, should we do this, or this? And we researched it and found the best place to give our money, where most of our money went to
Yeah.
that,
And I look at something like Shriners, where Lily was. You know what? I don't want to see the doctors making $32,000 a year. I want the
Thank you,
doctor
sir.
to be paid well,
Yeah.
Yes.
because, I'm trusting somebody's life with them. And quite frankly, you work your butt through medical school.
Oh, yeah.
And you can save my life, you deserve your Mercedes.
I think you deserve a new
cool.
truck.
I'm cool with that. Mine's only 10 years old now. Just keep that, I think we keep that in mind, and we make, we make our determinations as to what's right and what's not, and support
It
what.
has to be from a giving heart.
Yeah.
You do it, so it has to be
Yeah.
right with you, and then it's out of your hands.
Exactly.
Once you give a gift, it's a gift.
Yep.
It's out of your hands.
All right, well,
Okay, well, thank you next week we have the Last Supper, I believe.
oh my goodness.
That's our topic.